Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Shadow Storyteller. Before we dive into tonight's chilling tale, don't forget to subscribe, hit the like button, and leave a comment down below so I know what you think of these bedtime horror stories. Your support means a lot, and it helps me bring you more eerie tales to keep you awake at night. Now, let's begin. Tonight's story is called The Babysitter from Elm Street. It was the fall of 2018 in a small town outside of Dayton, Ohio. The air had already begun to carry that crisp bite of autumn, and the streets were lined with orange leaves that curled and crunched under every step. College student Emma Collins, a 20-year-old sophomore studying English literature at the University of Dayton, had been struggling to balance her classes with her part-time job at the campus library. Money was always tight, and when her roommate forwarded her a babysitting ad from the local community board, she didn't hesitate to call the number. The family lived on Elm Street, in an old Victorian-style house that stood taller and darker than the rest of the homes on the block. The posting mentioned only one child, a boy named Ethan, 8 years old, and a promise of generous pay for just a few nights of work each week. It seemed like the perfect solution. On a chilly Friday evening in late October, Emma arrived at the house for the first time. The sun was already sinking, painting the sky a bruised purple. The street was eerily quiet, save for the rustle of dry leaves scraping across the sidewalk. She checked her phone, 6:45 p.m. The parents had asked her to arrive by 7 sharp. She approached the porch, the wooden steps groaning under her weight, and rang the bell. Almost instantly, the door opened to reveal Mrs. Harper, a woman in her late 30s, her smile polite but stiff. Her husband, Mr. Harper, stood behind her, tall and broad-shouldered, with an unsettling stillness in his expression, as though he had been carved from stone. "Emma, isn't it?" Mrs. Harper's voice was warm but rehearsed. "We're so glad you could make it. Ethan's upstairs finishing his homework. We'll be gone until about midnight." Inside, the house smelled faintly of lavender mixed with something metallic, something Emma couldn't quite place. The lighting was dim, only a few lamps glowing in the corners of the rooms. She noticed that the curtains were drawn tightly shut, even though there was still some daylight outside. As the Harpers prepared to leave, Emma caught a glimpse of Ethan at the top of the staircase. He was a pale, thin boy with wide, watchful eyes. He didn't wave, didn't smile, just stared silently, as if trying to measure her from a distance. When the front door finally shut behind his parents, the house seemed to exhale. The quiet was heavy, pressing against Emma's ears. She called up gently, "Hey, Ethan, do you want to come downstairs?" The boy didn't answer right away. Then, slowly, he descended the stairs, clutching a small toy figure in his hand. His voice, when he finally spoke, was barely above a whisper. "They're not really my parents." Emma froze, unsure if she had heard him correctly. She managed an uneasy laugh. "What do you mean? Of course they are." But Ethan shook his head, his eyes darting nervously toward the door. "They tell people they are, but they're not. They don't want anyone to know." Emma's pulse quickened. She tried to brush it off. Children say strange things after all, but something in Ethan's tone made her skin crawl. The boy wasn't joking. His small hands trembled as he clutched the toy tighter, and his gaze never left the door, as though afraid someone might overhear. The clock in the hallway ticked louder than it should have, and somewhere deep inside the house, Emma thought she heard a faint creak like footsteps on the floor above them. The babysitter from Elm Street. Emma tried to steady her breathing. She wasn't sure if the boy was simply playing some odd game, or if he genuinely believed what he'd said. Children sometimes blurred the line between imagination and reality, but there was something about Ethan's tone, quiet, brittle, and dead serious, that made it hard to dismiss. "Why would you say something like that?" she asked, her voice softer now, almost coaxing, as though she didn't want to scare him off. Ethan kept his eyes fixed on the front door, and then, Slowly, he shook his head. They don't like when I talk about it. They told me never to tell. But you're new. You don't know them yet. The words unsettled her. She tried to keep her expression calm, masking the unease crawling up her spine. Maybe this was a test, she thought. Maybe the Harpers had told their son to say strange things just to see how she would react as a babysitter. Some parents had unusual ways of gauging responsibility. All right, Emma said lightly, trying to shift the mood. How about we make some popcorn and put on a movie? That sound good. For the first time, Ethan's eyes flickered toward her. He gave a small nod, though his lips remained tight and pale. They moved into the kitchen, where Emma busied herself with the microwave, letting the rhythmic hum fill the silence. The house still felt unnervingly quiet, as if it were holding its breath. As the popcorn bag swelled, she glanced around the kitchen. It was spotless, almost unnaturally so. No stray cereal boxes, no dishes in the sink, not even a magnet on the refrigerator. The cleanliness struck her as strange for a house with a young child. Ethan slid onto one of the stools by the counter, fiddling with the toy in his hand. She noticed now that it wasn't a superhero or an action figure. It was a small wooden carving crudely shaped like a person with hollow eyes. That's an interesting toy, Emma said, trying to keep the conversation light. Did your parents give it to you? Ethan shook his head quickly, his face tightening. No, I found it. In the attic. The microwave beeped, startling her slightly. She poured the popcorn into a bowl and led Ethan to the living room. The curtains there were drawn tightly, too, and the room smelled faintly of something musty, like damp wood. She turned on the television, flipping through channels until she found a cartoon. Ethan sat stiffly on the sofa, hardly watching. Instead, his eyes kept darting to the shadows in the hallway. Emma forced herself to focus on the cartoon, but her mind kept circling back to his words. They're not really my parents. By the time the clock chimed 8, the house had grown darker, the sound of the outside world fading. Emma rose to check on the upstairs, just to make sure everything was in order. Ethan trailed after her, silent as a shadow. At the top of the staircase, the hallway stretched long and dim, lined with closed doors. Emma felt her throat dry as she pushed one open, revealing Ethan's bedroom. The walls were painted pale blue, but bare, no posters, no pictures, nothing that gave the room life. His bed was neatly made, and the only thing on his nightstand was a glass of water and a small lamp. Do you like it here? She asked. Ethan didn't answer. Instead, he pointed to the ceiling. Emma tilted her head, straining her ears. At first she heard nothing, then a faint dragging sound, like something being moved across the floor above them. Her skin prickled. The attic? She whispered. Ethan nodded once. His lips parted as if to speak, but then he shut them again, pressing the wooden toy against his chest. Emma forced herself to smile. Probably just the house settling. Old houses do that. But even as she said it, she didn't believe herself. Later, when Ethan finally dozed off in his room, Emma returned to the living room and sat tensely on the sofa. The ticking of the hallway clock was louder now, each second stretching longer than it should. Her phone buzzed, and she glanced down, relieved to see a message from her roommate, Megan, asking how the babysitting gig was going. She started to type a reply, but then stopped when she noticed movement in the reflection of the darkened window. Her heart skipped. She turned quickly, but the room was empty. Trying to shake off her nerves, she went to check the locks on the front door. Firm, secure. She moved to the back door, also locked. She was halfway back to the sofa when she heard its soft, deliberate footsteps upstairs. Emma froze. Ethan was supposed to be asleep. Grabbing her phone like a lifeline, she climbed the stairs again, her footsteps slow, careful. She paused at Ethan's door and pushed it open just a crack. He was still in bed, curled on his side, his small chest rising and falling with steady breaths. The footsteps had not been his. She glanced toward the attic door at the far end of the hallway. It was closed, but as she stared, she swore she saw the doorknob twitch just slightly, as if touched from the other side. A chill ran through her bones. She hurried back to Ethan's room and shut the door softly, leaving only a sliver of light from the hallway. She pulled up a chair and sat there, watching him sleep, trying to ignore the creaks and sighs of the house. Minutes dragged into hours. Each sound made her flinch. Each shadow seemed to stretch further across the floor. She told herself it was her imagination, that she was just tired, that houses made noises at night. But then, sometime close to midnight, the front door opened. She jumped to her feet, heart pounding, and hurried to the window. The driveway was empty. No car. No sound of tires on gravel. She turned back just as the front door clicked shut again. And then, silence. Her phone buzzed once more. She looked down at the screen. A text message from an unknown number. It read, "Do not let them in." Her blood ran cold. She lifted her head slowly, the words echoing in her skull. The Harpers were supposed to be back any minute. But what if it wasn't really them? The house seemed to listen with her, every corner alive with stillness. Somewhere downstairs, the floor creaked, followed by the faint sound of breathing that did not belong to her or Ethan. Emma's pulse hammered in her throat. She moved back to Ethan's bedside, her trembling fingers brushing his hair from his face. He stirred slightly, then opened his eyes. "They're here," he whispered, and from the bottom of the staircase, she heard a voice calling up, calm and measured. "Emma, we're home. You can go now." The tone was gentle, practiced, but it didn't sound like the woman who had greeted her hours ago. Her phone buzzed again. Another message from the unknown number. "Do not believe them. The babysitter from Elm Street." Emma stood frozen in the doorway of Ethan's room, her breath shallow, her heart pounding against her ribs like a trapped bird. The voice from downstairs floated up again, steady and deliberate, carrying an edge that made her skin prickle. "Emma, you can go home now. We'll take it from here." Her instincts screamed at her to stay put, but her rational mind wrestled with the absurdity of the situation. Perhaps it really was the Harpers, back earlier than expected. Yet the text message in her phone burned like a warning flare. Do not believe them. She turned to Ethan. The boy was already sitting upright, his eyes wide, his little hands gripping the wooden figure so tightly his knuckles whitened. "It's not them," he whispered. "It never is." The words chilled her more than the autumn wind ever could. She crouched beside his bed, lowering her voice. "Then who is it?" Ethan swallowed hard. "I don't know, but they look like them. They talk like them. They wear them." Emma's stomach lurched. She wanted to dismiss his words as the imagination of a frightened child, but the sound of slow, deliberate footsteps climbing the stairs made that impossible. She acted quickly. Grabbing her phone, she switched off the light and whispered, "Stay quiet." Then she pulled him gently out of bed. Together, they slipped into the closet, shutting the door just enough to leave a crack of air. Inside, it smelled of mothballs and old wood, the darkness pressing close around them. The footsteps reached the landing. Emma's pulse thundered in her ears. She could see, through the crack in the closet door, the faint glow of the hallway light as a shadow stretched across the floor. "Emma." The voice was nearer now, right outside the bedroom door. "Is everything all right? You can come out. We're back." The doorknob turned with an eerie slowness. The door creaked open. Emma held her breath, every muscle in her body taut with terror. Through the gap, she caught a glimpse of someone entering the room. The figure looked like Mrs. Harper. The same dark hair, the same neat blouse she had worn earlier. But something was off. The way she moved was stiff, almost mechanical, her head turning in jerky motions like a puppet pulled by invisible strings. Her eyes glinted strangely in the dim light, too reflective, like glass catching a flame. Emma clamped a hand over Ethan's mouth, feeling his tiny body trembling against her. The figure paused in the middle of the room, tilting its head as if listening. Then it spoke, but the voice was wrong. Too low, too layered, as though more than one person was speaking at once. "Where are you, Emma?" A cold wave washed over her. This was not Mrs. Harper. The figure lingered a moment longer, then moved slowly toward the bed. It leaned over the empty covers, its hand pressing down against the sheets. When it realized the boy was gone, it let out a sound that made Emma's blood run cold. A hiss, drawn out and guttural, like steam escaping from a broken pipe. The thing straightened abruptly, its head twisting unnaturally to one side. For a moment, Emma thought it would look directly toward the closet. But then, as if distracted by something else, it turned and glided back toward the hallway. Only when the sound of its footsteps faded did Emma dare to breathe again. Ethan clung to her arm, whispering so softly she barely caught the words. "We can't stay here. They'll come back." Her mind raced. She had to get him out of the house. But how? The front door was downstairs, and if those things were inside, they would surely be waiting. She thought of the windows, but the house was old and the frames looked heavy. Still, it was worth trying. She pulled Ethan from the closet, motioning for silence, and together they crept to the window. She struggled with the latch, her fingers slick with sweat. It groaned as it lifted, the sound impossibly loud in the stillness. She froze, listening. No footsteps, no voices. With effort, she pushed the window open wide enough for Ethan to slip through. The cool night air rushed in, carrying the scent of damp leaves and far-off smoke. She helped him climb onto the sill, whispering, "Careful. There's a roof ledge. Sit tight." Ethan nodded, his pale face set with determination, and clambered onto the ledge outside. Emma followed, pulling herself out into the night. The shingles were cold and slick under her palms as she crawled across the narrow ledge, heart hammering. From here, she could see the street below, empty, silent, bathed in the weak glow of a single street lamp. Then, from inside the house, she heard another sound. A different voice this time. "Emma." Ethan come back inside. It was deeper, heavier. She risked a glance through the second-floor window and nearly slipped. A tall figure was moving through the hallway now, broader than the first. It looked like Mr. Harper, but its face seemed to shift in the dim light, the features blurring and twisting, never settling into something fully human. Emma gripped Ethan's hand. "We have to get down," she whispered. They edged along the roof until they reached a trellis covered in dead vines. It looked fragile, but it was their only chance. Emma went first, climbing carefully, her shoes scraping against the wood. The trellis groaned under her weight, but somehow held. When her feet finally touched the ground, she looked up and motioned for Ethan to follow. The boy moved quickly, nimble despite his fear, and within moments he was on the ground beside her. Together, they sprinted across the lawn, the crunch of leaves loud beneath their feet. They had just reached the sidewalk when the front door of the house slammed open. The two figures stood silhouetted in the doorway, side by side, their faces hidden in shadow. Their voices rose together, a chilling chorus. "You can't run." Emma grabbed Ethan's hand tighter, pulling him down the street. Her lungs burned, her legs screamed, but she didn't stop until they reached the end of Elm Street, where the faint glow of a convenience store sign flickered in the distance. They stumbled inside, the harsh fluorescent lights a stark contrast to the darkness outside. The cashier, a young man with tired eyes, looked up in surprise as Emma collapsed against the counter, breathless, clutching Ethan's hand. "Are you all right?" he asked. eyes widening at their pale, frantic faces. Emma tried to answer, but the words caught in her throat. Instead, Ethan spoke for her, his voice steady despite the tremor in his hands. "They're not my parents." The cashier blinked, confused, but Emma didn't care. She pulled out her phone, dialing 911 with shaking fingers. As she explained in a rush to the dispatcher, she glanced toward the glass doors of the store. Outside, under the flickering streetlight, two figures stood at the far end of the parking lot. Perfectly still, perfectly silent, watching. The operator's voice came through the line, calm and professional. "Stay where you are, ma'am. Officers are on their way." But Emma wasn't sure the police could help. Not with whatever those things were. Beside her, Ethan squeezed her hand, his eyes fixed on the glass doors. "They won't stop," he whispered. "They never stop." And then, as if to prove his words, the overhead lights in the store flickered once, twice, before half of them went out, plunging the aisles into shadow. Emma's stomach dropped. The cashier swore under his breath, fumbling for the backup switch. And in that brief, stuttering darkness, Emma saw it again. Movement at the edge of the store, near the windows. A reflection of faces pressed against the glass. Too many eyes, too many mouths, all shifting like wax melting under heat. She stumbled back, dragging Ethan with her, her voice breaking into a whisper. "Oh my God." The cashier finally managed to flip the emergency lights on, flooding the store in a weak red glow. But when Emma looked again, the glass was clear, empty. The parking lot stood silent. No one outside, but the fear didn't leave her. She knew, deep down, that they hadn't disappeared. They were still there, waiting. The red glow of the emergency lights painted the convenience store in an otherworldly hue. The air felt heavier now, as if the night itself had crept inside with them. Emma's phone was still pressed to her ear, the dispatcher repeating that officers were on their way. But the reassurance felt thin, fragile, like a thread that could snap at any moment. Ethan clutched the wooden figure tightly, his knuckles pale. He hadn't moved from Emma's side since they fled the Harper house. His eyes darted constantly toward the windows, as if expecting the glass to shatter at any moment. The cashier, a lanky young man whose name tag read Kyle, looked from Emma to Ethan and back again. "What's going on? Are you guys being followed or something?" Emma opened her mouth, but she didn't know where to start. What could she possibly say? That the couple she was supposed to babysit for were imposters, things wearing the skins of people, that they had heard voices not quite human, footsteps too heavy, movements too stiff. Even she could hardly believe it, and she had been there. They're not who they look like," she finally whispered. Kyle frowned. "Who?" Before she could answer, Ethan tugged on her sleeve. "They're here," he whispered. His small voice trembled, but his eyes remained locked on the glass doors. Emma turned, her stomach dropping. Outside, at the far edge of the parking lot, the same two figures stood beneath the flickering streetlight. The silhouettes were unmistakable, tall, unmoving, side by side. Kyle swore under his breath. "Okay, that's creepy. I'm calling my manager." He grabbed the store phone, but before he could dial, the overhead lights flickered again. The red emergency glow dimmed for a moment, throwing the store into near darkness. Emma pulled Ethan closer, her body taut with fear. "We need to stay in the light," she whispered. The lights steadied, buzzing faintly, but Emma's heart didn't slow. She glanced back at the parking lot. The figures were gone. Kyle muttered nervously. They just disappeared. What the hell? Emma didn't answer. She knew they hadn't disappeared. They were just waiting. The bell above the store door jingled suddenly, the cheerful sound jarring in the tense silence. All three of them turned toward it, but no one had entered. The door swung gently, as though it had been pushed, then stilled. Kyle backed away from the counter. Okay, I don't know what's happening, but I don't get paid enough for this. Emma's phone buzzed again. She glanced down at the screen. Another message from the unknown number. They're already inside. Her blood turned to ice. She looked around wildly, scanning every aisle, every shadow. The store seemed empty, but the silence was wrong. Too deep, too absolute, as though the night had swallowed every ordinary sound. Ethan's hand tightened on hers. They like to hide, he whispered. A sudden crash shattered the silence. A display of chips toppled in aisle 3, bags spilling across the floor. Kyle jumped, nearly dropping the phone. "Hello," his voice wavered. "Is someone in here?" Emma pulled Ethan back toward the far corner of the store, her eyes never leaving the darkened aisle. She whispered urgently, "We need to stay together." Another sound followed, softer this time, a dragging noise like something heavy being pulled across the linoleum. It came from behind the shelves, inching closer. Kyle grabbed a flashlight from under the counter and flicked it on. The beam cut through the dimness, landing on the aisle where the display had fallen. For a moment, nothing moved. Then the beam caught something at the far end, legs too long, bent at unnatural angles, slipping just out of view. Kyle cursed loudly and stumbled back. What the hell was that? Emma didn't answer. She knew now that whatever wore the Harpers' faces was no longer trying to pretend. The store's clock ticked loudly in the silence. Outside, faint sirens wailed in the distance, growing nearer. Relief surged in Emma's chest. The police. But Ethan shook his head, his voice barely audible. They won't make it in time. The sirens grew louder, then stopped abruptly, cut off as though swallowed. The silence returned, heavier than before. Kyle's eyes widened. They just stopped. Why would they stop? Emma didn't want to think about it. She pulled Ethan closer and whispered, "We need to hide." They moved quickly toward the back of the store, past the rows of shelves and coolers. The storeroom door was ajar, and Emma pushed it open, ushering Ethan inside. Kyle hesitated, then followed, slamming the door shut behind them. The storeroom was cramped, filled with boxes and crates stacked high. The smell of cardboard and cleaning supplies hung in the air. Emma found a corner and crouched with Ethan, pulling him close. Kyle leaned against the door, his chest heaving. For a few tense moments, all was quiet. Then came the sound. A knock. Slow, deliberate against the storeroom door. 3 times. Then silence. Kyle's face drained of color. "No way," he whispered. The knock came again, louder this time. The door handle rattled, turning slightly, but the lock held. Emma's phone buzzed once more. She pulled it out with trembling hands. Another message glowed on the screen. "They don't need doors." Almost instantly, a shadow passed across the far wall, stretching impossibly tall, bending and twisting. Ethan buried his face against Emma's shoulder. Kyle swore again, his voice cracking. And then, from the darkness of the storeroom itself, a voice spoke. "Emma." It was Mrs. Harper's voice, but it was wrong, echoing as though spoken from inside a hollow shell. Emma's throat tightened. She clutched Ethan tighter, whispering frantically, "Stay with me. Don't move." The shadows shifted again, crawling across the walls like spilled ink. Kyle raised the flashlight, but the beam flickered, sputtered, then died. The darkness swallowed them whole. Emma could feel it, the air pressing closer, the weight of unseen eyes watching. And somewhere in the blackness, the sound of breathing that did not belong to them. Ethan's small hand slipped into hers. His whisper trembled, but carried a strange certainty. "They're looking for me, not you." Emma's chest tightened. She whispered back, "Why?" He hesitated. Then, with a shiver, he said, "Because I'm not supposed to be here either." Emma froze, her heart hammering so loud she thought it might give them away. Before she could ask what he meant, the storeroom door creaked open, slow and deliberate. Red light from the emergency bulbs spilled inside, cutting through the darkness. And standing in the doorway were the Harpers, or what was left of them. Their faces were stretched, their eyes too wide, their mouths gaping with smiles that showed far too many teeth. Their movements were jerky, wrong, as though someone was forcing them to mimic being human. "Time to go home, Ethan," they said together, their voices overlapping in a grotesque harmony. Emma pulled him back into the shadows, her body shaking. She didn't know how much longer she could protect him, but she knew one thing for certain. The night on Elm Street was only just beginning. Under the dim flicker of the old lamp in the Parker living room, Amelia sat on the edge of the couch, her eyes darting between the stairs and the front door. The evening air pressing against the window panes carried the hum of distant crickets, but inside the house, everything was unnervingly still. The television, which she had left on for background noise, now only showed static, as though the signal had been cut deliberately. She reached for the remote, switched it off, and for the first time that night, the silence felt almost too heavy. It was close to midnight, and Mr. and Mrs. Parker still hadn't returned. They had promised to be back around 10, but hours had passed with no message, no call, not even a sign of life. Amelia checked her phone again, the faint glow of the screen highlighting her worried expression. No new notifications, just a thin bar of signal. She sighed and brushed her hair back, glancing again at the staircase where little Evan had gone to bed. For a moment, she thought about going upstairs to check on him, but a sound stopped her. It was faint, like a creak of wood, coming from somewhere above. At first, she told herself it was probably Evan shifting in bed. Children move a lot in their sleep, after all. Yet, the sound came again, slower, heavier, like the deliberate weight of a foot pressing down on an old wooden floorboard. Her chest tightened. Slowly, Amelia rose from the couch, gripping her phone in one hand. She didn't turn on a flashlight, afraid the sudden brightness might draw attention. Instead, she listened, straining her ears to pick up the faint rhythm of those movements. They seemed to come from the far end of the hallway upstairs near the master bedroom. Gathering her courage, she tiptoed toward the stairs. Each step groaned under her weight, even though she tried her best to move quietly. The air grew cooler as she climbed, her breathing shallow, her pulse hammering in her ears. At the top of the stairs, the hallway stretched out in front of her, dimly lit by a single night light plugged into the wall. Evan's bedroom door was slightly ajar, just the way she had left it earlier. Beyond that, the master bedroom door stood closed. Then, a low murmur drifted through the still air. A voice, deep and indistinct, coming from behind the master bedroom door. Amelia froze, her nails digging into her palm as she gripped her phone tighter. She knew the Parkers weren't home, and Evan was too young to speak in such a tone. So who was in there? Her first instinct was to grab Evan and leave immediately. She crept toward his room, nudging the door open slowly. Inside, Evan was asleep, his small chest rising and falling peacefully. The soft glow of a night lamp illuminated his face, innocent and unbothered by the strange tension gripping the house. Amelia crouched beside him, whispering softly, "Evan, sweetie, wake up." The boy stirred, rubbing his eyes. "Miss Amelia," he mumbled. "Shoo." She hushed him gently. "We're going to play a game. We need to be very quiet, okay? Can you do that for me?" Evan nodded sleepily, still half in a dream. She helped him out of bed, and together they tiptoed back into the hallway. But as they passed the master bedroom, the door creaked open just a fraction. Amelia's heart leapt into her throat. She pulled Evan closer, shielding him with her arm, and quickened her pace down the stairs. Halfway down, a whisper floated from above. "Amelia." Her legs nearly gave out. The voice was unmistakable, calm, cold, and yet somehow knowing her name. She turned just slightly, enough to see a shadow stretching along the floor at the top of the stairs, long and unnaturally thin. It didn't match the silhouette of any ordinary person. Without thinking, she scooped Evan up and rushed the rest of the way down. They reached the front door, but when she twisted the handle, it wouldn't budge. The lock was jammed, though she was sure she hadn't locked it earlier. Panic surged. She tugged harder, but the door refused to give. Behind her, slow footsteps began descending the stairs. One step at a time, deliberate, unhurried, as though whoever it was knew there was no escape. Amelia scanned the room desperately and spotted the back door leading to the kitchen. Holding Evan tight, she darted toward it. The kitchen was dim, the curtains drawn shut, but moonlight seeped faintly through the edges. She grabbed the back door handle, twisted locked. She cursed under her breath, fumbling to find a way out. Then she saw it, the window above the sink. It was small, but maybe large enough for Evan to fit through. She pulled a chair over, lifted him up, and whispered urgently, "Climb through, Evan. Go to the neighbor's house and don't look back." The boy's eyes widened. "What about you? I'll be right behind you," she lied, forcing a reassuring smile. As she helped Evan through the window, the footsteps stopped. Silence stretched across the house again, thick and suffocating. She could feel eyes on her, watching, waiting. Evan slipped out the window and dropped onto the grass outside. She heard him land softly and scurry away. Relief washed over her. At least he was safe. But then, from the darkness of the kitchen doorway, a figure emerged. It was tall, dressed in clothes that seemed outdated, like something from decades ago. The face, however, was wrong. It looked almost like Mr. Parker, but not quite. The features were sharper, the smile wider, the eyes far too dark. "Leaving so soon?" the figure asked, its voice carrying the same unsettling calm she had heard upstairs. Amelia's throat went dry. She backed against the counter, her mind racing. Her phone buzzed suddenly in her hand. An incoming call. She glanced at the screen. The name read Mrs. Parker. Her trembling finger slid across the screen, and she lifted the phone to her ear. "Mrs. Parker?" she whispered, her voice breaking. On the other end, a woman's voice replied, but it was distorted, like it was coming from a long distance away. "Amelia, listen to me. Get out of the house. That's not us." Her blood ran cold. She turned her gaze back to the figure in the kitchen. It was still smiling, standing impossibly still, as though it had all the time in the world. The call crackled again, the voice more frantic now. "Whatever you do, don't let it touch you." Amelia's grip on the phone loosened, her body trembling as she tried to inch toward the window. The figure tilted its head slightly, that too wide smile stretching even further. And then it moved, fast, too fast for anything human. Amelia screamed, throwing herself toward the window, her only chance of escape. The night air outside was cold and sharp, carrying the scent of damp earth and cut grass. Amelia's body hit the ground just beside the kitchen window, scraping her hands against the rough stones of the Parkers' garden bed. She barely had time to pull herself upright when she heard the sound again. That voice calling her name from inside the house, smooth and unhurried, as though it already knew she couldn't escape. "Amelia!" She stumbled forward, her legs heavy with fear, her breaths coming in ragged bursts. Evan was nowhere in sight, which was good. Maybe he had made it to the neighbor's house already. But the Parker property was surrounded by thick trees, and the quiet road beyond felt miles away. The porch light flickered once, then went out completely, plunging the house into darkness. From the kitchen window she had crawled through, a shadow moved, stretching unnaturally across the curtain before fading into nothing. Amelia didn't wait to see what it was. She ran. The grass was wet beneath her sneakers, pulling at her steps as though the ground itself wanted to slow her down. She darted across the yard toward the fence, heart hammering in her chest. The image of that too wide smile burned into her mind. When she reached the fence, she scrambled over it, the wood scraping her arms. On the other side lay the narrow strip of asphalt that connected Elm Street to the neighboring cul-de-sac. Her lungs burned as she sprinted along the road, searching for lights in the distance. At last, she saw them, warm, golden lights spilling from the front windows of a modest two-story house about 4 doors down. She aimed herself toward it, her legs trembling but refusing to stop. By the time she reached the porch, she was gasping, pounding on the door with both fists. "Help! Please, help me!" she cried, her voice raw with panic. The door opened just a crack, revealing a tired-looking man in his 60s, wearing a flannel robe. His eyes widened when he saw her. "Good Lord, girl, what's happened?" Amelia barely had the strength to speak. "It's the Parkers' house," she stammered. "There's someone in there. It's not them. It's not." Her words tangled in her throat as sobs rose. The man pulled the door wider and ushered her inside. "Come in quickly." The warmth of the living room struck her immediately. The scent of coffee lingering in the air, the hum of a space heater running in the corner. She sank onto the couch, shivering uncontrollably. "My name's Frank," the man said, crouching beside her. "You're Amelia, right? The babysitter? I've seen you walking with a boy." She nodded, struggling to control her breathing. "Evan, is he here?" Frank shook his head. "No, but if he ran this way, he might have gone to the Millers next door. They've got kids too. Maybe he thought it was safer." He reached for the phone on the side table. "We'll call the police. You sit tight." As he dialed, Amelia forced herself to focus. Her phone was still clutched in her hand, the last call from Mrs. Parker frozen on the screen. She stared at it, hearing again the distorted voice warning her not to let it touch her. Who, or what, had been in that house pretending to be the Parkers? Frank spoke into the phone, his tone sharp and steady. "Yes, this is Frank Daniels on Elm Street. We need officers right away. There's been a break-in, maybe worse." A babysitter barely got out. The seconds dragged as he gave more details. Amelia tried to calm her racing thoughts, but then something shifted in the room. The lights dimmed, just slightly, almost unnoticeably, but her skin prickled with cold. She sat up straighter, her eyes flicking toward the window. There across the street, standing in the shadow of a lamppost, was the figure, tall still watching. Its face was obscured in the dark, but she didn't need to see it clearly. She felt its gaze. "Frank," she whispered, her voice trembling. "It's here." He followed her line of sight, his face paling. "Stay back from the window," he muttered, drawing the curtain quickly. But even with the fabric closed, Amelia could still feel it, like an invisible thread pulling at her, connecting her to that thing outside. Minutes stretched, heavy and suffocating. Then came a knock at the door. 3 slow, deliberate taps. Frank stiffened. "That'll be the police," he said, though his voice betrayed doubt. Amelia's blood ran cold. She shook her head violently. "No, don't open it. Please, don't." The knocks came again, louder this time, followed by that voice. Calm, familiar, but wrong. "Amelia, it's safe now. You can come out." She clamped her hands over her ears, rocking slightly. "It's not them. It's not them." Frank hesitated, torn between disbelief and the weight of the terror in her voice. Then, thankfully, he stepped back from the door. "We wait," he said firmly. The knocking stopped. Silence stretched. And then, faintly, from the back of the house, came the sound of the kitchen window sliding open. Amelia's heart nearly stopped. She and Frank locked eyes, both realizing at the same time It was already inside. He moved quickly, grabbing a heavy fireplace poker from beside the hearth. "Stay behind me," he ordered. They crept toward the hallway. The only sounds their breaths and the faint hum of the heater. From the kitchen came a soft scrape, like nails dragging across the floor. Amelia's phone buzzed suddenly in her hand. She glanced at the screen. Mrs. Parker again. Her hand shook as she answered. "Amelia." The voice came through, distorted but urgent. "Don't let it find you in the dark. Keep the lights on. Do you understand?" The line crackled and died. Amelia's eyes darted to the ceiling lights above. They were still on, but dimmer than before, as though something was draining their power. From the kitchen doorway, the figure stepped into view, its head tilted unnaturally, its body too tall for the room. The smile stretched wider, showing teeth that didn't belong in any human mouth. Frank raised the poker, his hands trembling but steady enough. "Stay back," he barked. The thing only laughed, a sound that echoed too loud, as though it came from every wall around them. Amelia backed toward the stairs, her eyes never leaving the figure. Her chest heaved, her mind screaming for her to run, but her legs felt rooted to the floor. The lights flickered again, once, twice, then the house went black. In the suffocating darkness, Amelia heard the sound of Frank swinging the poker, a grunt, and then silence. A hand brushed her shoulder. She screamed. When Amelia finally burst through the front door of Frank's house, she was no longer sure how she had managed it. One moment, the figure had been inches away from her in the dark, its cold breath brushing her skin, and the next she was stumbling out into the middle of Elm Street, gasping for air under the pale wash of the street lamps. The night was silent again, too silent. The crickets were gone, the wind was gone, and even her own footsteps seemed muffled as she staggered toward the Miller's house. She banged on their door until her knuckles ached, praying someone, anyone, would answer. At last the door swung open, and Mrs. Miller appeared, her robe pulled tightly around her. Behind her, little Evan peeked out, his wide eyes filling with tears when he saw Amelia. Relief surged through her as she pulled him into her arms. "He's safe," Mrs. Miller said softly. "He came here a while ago. Said something was wrong at the Parkers' house." Before Amelia could respond, the distant wail of sirens echoed down the road. Blue and red lights soon flashed across the quiet street as police cars pulled up, their presence breaking the suffocating stillness. Officers rushed past her toward Frank's house, weapons drawn, shouting commands into the night. But when they searched, the house was empty. No sign of Frank. No sign of the intruder. No broken windows. No forced entry. Just silence and shadows. One officer gently asked Amelia to describe what she had seen, but as she spoke, she saw the doubt flicker in his eyes. A too wide smile. A voice that wasn't human. A figure that drained the light itself. How could she explain it without sounding mad? Hours later, as the sky began to lighten with the first hints of dawn, Amelia sat on the curb outside the Miller's house, Evan still clutching her hand. Exhaustion weighed down on her, but sleep felt impossible. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw it, standing in the Parkers' hallway, calling her name. Mrs. Parker called her phone again just after sunrise. This time the voice was clear, frantic, and undeniably real. "Amelia? We're so sorry. We've been trying to reach you all night. We were in an accident on the highway. Our car broke down. Are you and Evan okay?" Amelia's lips trembled as she answered, "I don't know," because deep down, she realized something that chilled her more than anything else that night. Whatever had been in that house hadn't been stopped. It hadn't disappeared. It had simply let her go, and she didn't know why. As the police cars finally pulled away and the sun climbed higher into the sky, Elm Street seemed peaceful again, ordinary even. But Amelia knew the truth. Somewhere in the shadows, the thing with the too wide smile was still watching, waiting, and she could only wonder when it would call her name again.